Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Decline Invite, the only invite worth accepting. Today, I've got a special guest all the way from the UK, the one, the only, and my old coworker, Mr. Adam Hicks. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing? You right?
Doing great. I appreciate you working with the time zone difference here.
Cool. And
So, as I kind of mentioned, I met Adam in the leadership group at Iris with the one, the only Natasha, who did an early episode with us. That was a great experience. I'm sure we'll touch base on that a little bit here. But going right into it, let's do some icebreakers. So, some of my notes I have just really quick on your background is you got over 20 years in software development, architecture, and leadership at this point. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of what that journey's been like?
well, it's been a bit all over the place. I think it's probably a good place to start with. So I've worked in large companies. My current employer is a fairly large company, and I've worked in small tech firms with maybe only 10, 15, 20 people in. So I've had quite a bit of experience over the years and different sort of cultures as well. Yeah, just sort of different opportunities come at different times. And it's interesting how sometimes you could just make that one decision and suddenly sort of whole new doors open. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely been a journey about fun. Absolutely. But I'm a developer, really. That's where I come from. I have led teams of up to 50 people, not thankfully directly all at once and reporting straight into me, because that would be, I have no free kind of space whatsoever. But I've often worked best, I think, when I've been in a sort of a group of people, maybe not necessarily taking the sort of line management type role, but really just being like a sort of supportive kind of a leadership kind of role. Those are the kind of roles I've done well in, and I still kind of in those kind of roles, which is great. And it's also the ones I enjoy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely get the supporting type, wanting to help one another, help others, teach others.
Mm.
That's something that I try to do with my skill set as well. Your skill set is definitely more technical than mine at this point, which I appreciate. It's like comparing and getting a run for your money whenever I see another certification of yours go up. It's like rooting over here across the pond. Like, yeah, go get the next one. So I see your current role is enterprise architect at Iris. It looks like you're shaping some architecture governance and frameworks across maybe some multiple product lines. I also know that you have a cloud background in Azure, AWS, all kinds of certifications around that, right? My notes just go on and on and on for the certs, which is amazing. What would you say the cloud journey has been like? And what do you like best about just cloud in general?
Yeah, I mean, a cloud journey is quite different for lots of organizations, I find. For myself, personally, it's just a never-ending journey, really. And I come across lots of different teams, projects where they might be right at the start of that journey, or they might they're looking to do like some kind of transformation kind of exercise, or they've been established in the cloud for like 15 years or 20 years for quite some time, using a lot of sort of cloud native kind of services, as opposed to sort of like seeing their own sort of like back office setup just replicated in a different server host. Yeah, it's been very interesting, and it there's always new stuff to find out. That is just, you can't know it all. I've always found that uh, if you don't come away with conversations sometimes thinking, well, I don't know if I've got everything across there, I feel like a bit of an imposter or whatever, then I think you probably, that's probably right, because there's just so much there. It's about sort of trying to pick out um, what your or your customer, or the team you're working with, what is their use case, and what can help them right now, because for a while, in about 5 or 6 months time, things change. And could be your company's changed, it could be the services that you're renting changed, it could be the industry you're working in is completely changed as well. So yeah, it's exciting, but it can be exhausting for some people. I think you have to be cognizant of that. I think you have to sort of be aware that whilst change is good, lots of change for most people in a quick burst can be quite destabilizing or disorientating. So it's just trying to help people.
Yeah, there's a few things there that you've mentioned that kind of hit home, especially as somebody who is just trying to research Azure architecture just over these last 3 or 4 days and kind of piece it all together. I'm talking with one of my old employees who is like reminding me constantly. He's like, what this stuff is. It's just, like you mentioned, it's changing all the time. Or Microsoft famously likes to change the wording to, some of the services and
intro is big one there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the Entra thing. I remember taking an exam. I forget which one it was now, one of the foundation level ones, and they just made the change,
Right.
but we didn't know about the change, and we're on the exam, and we're like, what in the heck is Entra? And I'm like, I'm going to guess this is like, the new AD or whatever. But yeah, that was wild. Like going into an exam with it showing up, but no idea what it was.
I remember talking to one of my colleagues about, because they called it Entra ID. So then we had Entra ID IDs, and I just thought, that's just insane. That's just
right,
not
like what's happening. The last note that I wanted to get before we actually get into the icebreakers is just the fact that you frame yourself as a learning champion, a mentor, organizer of engineering talks, and a longtime blood donor. So I pulled all of that just from your profile and what you market yourself as, and I think that's amazing, right? That's uplifting. That is, leader of the people, which I get along very well with along the way.
Yeah, I think as you get, I mean, I may not look it, but I've still got dark hair. Still got some hair at my age, which is great. But I think as you get older, there is a natural need for a lot of people to sort of not necessarily go out there and win everything, but more of a sort of emphasis to go out there and share to enable others and to sort of help people move forward. And that's very much where certainly I am with my sort of technical career.
Yeah, that winning conversation, that was definitely a younger, earlier thing where, no, it's not right. We have to win this. Yeah, you're right. Like I don't have all the dark hair. There's some grays very much showing up now. So I understand that wisdom of what is it that we really need to get to, and does it need to be this one that you learn that for sure. So some icebreakers. This could be interesting here. So one tech or cloud buzzword that you'd happily retire. You don't want to hear it anymore.
Well, I had a little think about this. So I think often in business you'll hear the word disruption, and I kind of see it everywhere now. So whether it's the last couple of years, it might be Gen AI is disrupting how people work, or it could be such and such service is this such and such chatbot is going to disrupt how you manage your email or whatever it is. And I just see that word over and over again, and I just feel like it really frames things as a battle, really sort of, going back to what I just said a minute ago, it's this sort of confrontational sort of, winner must take all, because if you don't get there first, you're not going to make all the money. And often the first company in a technology space, yes, they have a fantastic opportunity to sort of, make a lot of money, make a massive impact. But equally, they also have a massive opportunity to make all of the mistakes. And it's often the second or third generation of companies in a particular area which will be even more successful. I think that sort of framing as a battle, I rather focus on sort of innovation, new creation, think about sort of how things evolve. I think also sort of the aspect of also the word disruption, it also means it's got to be something massive. It's got to be something big. And actually I find most of the time it's just the small changes, the incremental changes, which people apply to their systems, their services, their technology, to the way they do business. Those are actually what makes the biggest difference in the long term. And it's those all added up together, that cumulative effect, which I think is really important. So disruption definitely, I think, goes to the retirement bin. I think I'll give you one extra as well, because I'm feeling generous today. So the other one I'll give is every day I hear the word legacy, as in legacy code. And people who know me will know I like to use the word vintage instead. And the reason why legacy is because there's this kind of connotation with legacy where it means old, a bit like me, rubbish, hopefully not like me, and needs replacing, definitely, hopefully. I don't need replacing just yet. But I rather look at things as, I want to leave a good legacy, not what the, people think, oh, legacy, oh, that's old, it needs to replace it with something new. But like a vintage wine, it's been around for a while, hopefully doesn't smell, hopefully is good. But it needs to have a more positive outcome. Because someone wrote some software 20 years ago doesn't mean it's rubbish. In fact, a lot of the critical software that the world relies on has been around for a lot longer than that. So it's about leaving a good legacy, and it's about enabling others to build on that legacy, I think is really important. So yeah, there you go. 2 words.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point. I never really thought about it that way. And I mean, the way you framed it is perfect, right? Like, we as humans, would hope to leave a good legacy, but we're constantly hearing legacy is throw it out. It's old, it's, deprecated, old, not secure, any of the negative, connotation with that. So I mean, you make a good point. One in and boom, we're out of the gate. um, so how about an invite that you usually decline and why? Like you get an invite and you're like, why this one?
I think this might be a common one, so I'll get the common one out of the way first. So like everyone, I get swamped with email, and I'll get invites from people who I've never met. So cold calling, fine. People have to make a living. That's not the thing which bothers me so much. But it's then when suddenly all these invites appear in my diary. So somehow they've, well, I don't know how they've done it, but they've hacked your email, or well, not hacked, but they certainly gamed it so that they know, all right, if I do this, I can get a message into your diary, get a message into your diary. And suddenly I'm looking at my diary, well, what is all this stuff? What is all this noise? So there's those kind of invites which cause noise from people outside your normal working environment. Yeah, definitely that will get a decline for me, I'm afraid. I think the other one which bothers me a little bit as well is every meeting is a high priority meeting. So you'll see these words, high priority meeting. I think every meeting can be a high priority. It depends what's in it is the important aspect. And I think that I think sometimes, and when it happens at the end of the day as well, it sounds like, I mean, I know occasionally there's urgent things, there's a mission critical thing, fair enough. But like, if you then sort of come into the call and you go, oh yeah, we really, really need to do this. We can talk about this tomorrow, or we can talk about this next week. Think about other people's priorities as well. Might be high priority to you who's sending the invite, but think about the recipient of that invite. Is it really high priority for them as well? So it's just, yeah, those are my 2 sort of decline invites, I think.
That's another thing. I think that as I've gotten older, I've realized that unless this is truly going to impact the business right this second, or what I like to say, this isn't life or death, it can wait till tomorrow. um, it changes your whole perspective, and it's like, yeah, we can talk about this in the morning. We don't need to do this right at the end of the day and impact people's after work life, their family life. We don't need to do that. It's not a big deal, right? So I think it's just an age thing and an understanding and wisdom thing as you learn, as you get along. Hopefully, at least for me, I try to put it around that.
You have to. I mean, obviously, give people a bit of slack now and then. I may know that someone's under a lot of stress, or they've got something going on in their lives, whatever. Everybody does. So you just have to, the kind of advice I mean. I talked to you earlier today or something like that. You didn't mention it then. Yeah, it's not a new thing. You know what I mean? So it's just, yeah, those kind of things. Just, I'll deal with that.
I'm with you. I'm with you. So this is going to be a nice segue as I have more of a note, and I'm going to turn it into a question, which is one surprising thing about you, especially something from your earlier career. And I have a note on your physics and science background. which is going to be a nice segue into our next segment. But what is something kind of from your earlier days that would be surprising to anybody maybe working with you or asking you for help, or something that you feel would be valuable today?
Well, this is an interesting one. So I've got a couple of things here. So I think one thing I was going to say first is that I'll go back even before I was working. So when I was a teenager, I was in the Scouts movement, and I really didn't like Scouts at all. My parents sent myself and my brother to Scouts because they wanted some time for themselves. It was absolutely made sense. But I'm clumsy. I have no coordination. I was a geeky nerd, spotty, skinny, probably not ideal sort of pioneering kind of, sort of outdoor kind of individual. And I think surprising was for me, really, not for anyone else, possibly, is now I am a scout leader. I'm volunteering now for Scouts, and I never thought I'd go back and do that because, I was really easy to pick on when I was a kid, there's negative experience in that. I think I was surprised myself, and I thought, no, I need to go back. I was, it's an age group which I don't really have much to do with, the sort of teenagers, because my children are younger. I worked with people who were obviously older. It was a complete group of people I had no contact with, and I wanted something community orientated. So that was a surprising thing. I surprised myself, actually. It was a really good thing to sort of get myself back into. So it was that. It's those kind of things. Sometimes you just have to kind of dispel your own beliefs, even if sometimes they're quite hard ingrained, out new things, and you'd definitely be surprised.
I feel like we should change the theme of the podcast to just, as you get older, you learn and become more, get more wisdom, because one of the things I've adopted now is to never say never, only to that never say never portion of it, because you'll be surprised, right? Like, things change and evolve, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh wow, I'm doing the thing that I told myself 10 years ago I wouldn't do, or 20 years ago, whatever it might be. Or I hated this, like I said I hated this, but here I am, like, I actually really love it now, kind of thing. So I
I think people will
understand.
probably think I'm slightly mad as well, sort of shouting at a load of, working with a load, 20, 30s teenagers. But, it's different. My job, most of the time, I'm in front of a computer in an office, and you've got to do other stuff as well. So it's important.
That one thing I was referring to was the game of golf. I was like, why does anybody play this when I was young? And then, because you just said you sit at your PC all day, and same for me, I ended up loving it because it got me away from technology and got me outside with nature. And then I realized I was just hanging out with my other buddies, and I'm like, well, why? I mean, other
Why
than,
wouldn't you?
yeah, I'm like, I had a very different opinion of that. So now I use it as my escape to come back and kind of recharge both ways, really, with technology and getting out and trying to maybe do a little bit better, because as somebody who likes to be challenged, it's a challenging sport.
Yeah, definitely.
So segueing into some of the physics talks, I see that there is some, I'm not even going to get this word right. We're going to get it very wrong. Physics with astrophysics, maybe, and a PhD in atmospheric physics. Did I get that all right?
You did? Yeah.
And like, the fact that you have this kind of background and then going into some of your earlier days, is this actually said as macaroni or Marconi?
Oh, Marconi,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Marconi. Okay. And building intranet prototypes with classic Microsoft tech. So how does that kind of background like lean into the technology and start to actually weave them together?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I sort of took a little bit of a whistle tour of my balancing, I mean, as a kid, I loved space Lego. Everyone likes Lego, but if you're of a certain vintage like me, there was space Lego from the late 70s into the 80s was something else. And there's some cracking, goofy photographs of me, each about 7 or 8, in front of this sort of creative spaceship or space station that I built for my dad to. But I loved the movies from the 70s and 80s, things like Star Wars, Close Encounters of Trouble, all of that kind of stuff. And I always liked puzzles. I mean, my grandfather, who was also a teacher, he often gave me, in the UK, we had something called SMP kind of maths books. So these kind of little thin kind of puzzle books kind of thing you had when I was little. So I was always into that. I was a bit of a nerd as well, but I loved solving puzzles. With a few classmates, I won a sort of national school competition, which was focusing on environmental impacts of health. Again, not physics at all. So at this point, I probably kind of was interested in space, but I was fairly good at maths. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. We came, the team I was involved, there was 4 of us, we came, I think it was 2nd or 3rd, but our prize was a week away at space school, which sounds fantastical. But this was at a university, so it was like a residential course. But I got to meet legend. Probably your American listeners might not know who this is, but the guy was called Professor Heinz Wolf. And he was really quite famous for a kind of science show called The Great Egg Race on the BBC back in the early 80s. He had sort of mad hair and anyway, he did a lot of popular science, and he was an academic himself, but it was his enthusiasm which really sort of resonated with me, along with my teachers as well and my mum and dad. It was them who sort of think, well, you're obviously good at maths, and I remember sort of thinking, I hate statistics. and which is ironic, and I'll come to that a bit later. But they said, "Well, why don't you do physics?" So that's how I got into physics. And I did some at the University of Leicester. I did some projects on things like accretion disks. I did a project on studying turbulent eddies in a simulated atmosphere, and it was those kind of things. I thought I really liked learning. Still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did do a lot of coding though. So there was a lot of, Fortran, C, all of that, using those kind of languages, using these scientific frameworks really to sort of do modeling back then. I did then go on to Imperial College, where I studied to do a doctorate in atmospheric physics. So I sort of came from the stars and came a bit closer down to the ground through the clouds. So I was a bit more in the clouds. So I was looking at the middle atmosphere, sort of where planes fly, essentially, but looking how lightning affected the chemistry of the atmosphere. This was using a lot of satellite data. So again, comes back to data, comes back to a lot of coding, a lot of modeling. I found studying for my doctorate really hard work, and it's something you just can't put down. Anyone who's done one will understand that. I did submit a draft, but to the exam, so unfortunately, the work required a lot of changes, and I was going through a difficult breakup at the time. So, whilst of course, I do regret not finishing it, obviously, not pursuing it to an end. I learned a hard lesson quite early on in my career that you have to look after your mental health. It's really, really important, and sometimes that means making hard choices. I felt that was a good sort of starter to sort of start off from a future career. Now, whilst I was writing up a PhD, so anyone who's written up a PhD will know it takes forever. I had to, funding ran out, so I had to get jobs. So I went on the graduate training program with Marconi, and this is where I got my first joys of working with Visual Basic and ASP. So this was back in the 1990s. So this is literally not long after the internet, or people's perception of the internet. Internet obviously was around a bit before then, but this is when it became very mainstream. And I was building sort of like some of the sort of websites using scripting technology, kind of thing. And again, I had another thing which is normally people would think is a bit of a setback. Marconi collapsed as a company. They were quite a big telecoms firm, BBC Marconi, and they collapsed a year after I started working there. So I did think, maybe it's something I did, but no. But that left me redundant. I'm hunting around for another job, and it's these kind of things when they happen to you, and it not often happens at the beginning of your career. It starts to make you think, what do I do? Am I still doing the right thing? Should I change my mind? Should I change focus? That kind of thing. But I always liked writing code. When I was a kid, like a lot of 80s kids, they might have a Commodore 64 or a ZX Spectrum. You'd get your favorite computer magazine, which would have like hex codes at the back, and you typing it in, trying to get something to work. And I always loved that that cycle of coding something, trying to solve a problem, shouting at the computer when it doesn't work, then eventually it does work, and feeling really proud of yourself that you got something to work, and that's kind of thought, can I make a job of that? Luckily, my second job was really good. Um, I met, well, they're really good friends of mine as well now. I mean, I've known them for a long time, but I was lucky. The second job, I had a group of people who were really good colleagues, and they probably will remember me printing out these huge sort of database diagrams. I mean, you have to remember we were in the era of where like a SQL admin password was a luxury. You know what I mean? At this point, people
Yeah.
just didn't take security seriously in
Right.
that kind of technology in the 90s. So I was very conscious on the database side. And it sort of made me realize I actually quite like how things, not just, I obviously like tinkering in code, but I also like to sort of understand how bigger things sort of fitted together, and sort of trying to sort of, do things like domain modeling, sort of trying to understand how can I represent like a shop or a basket or a service. One project we worked with an academic publisher is how to get all that process into a set of services, that kind of thing. I realized quite early on I was not a completer finisher. I'm good at starting stuff. I am not good at finishing stuff. So I realized probably solution architecture is probably quite a good role to go for eventually, because I thought you like tinkering, you can sort of help enable people, but there are others who would be better, obviously, at making sure the software works in production, is reliable. Like, all of those kind of ideas are obviously important. But I could see my value I could give was certainly more to the left of that. So that's how I got into solution architecture. And then enterprise architect, which is kind of the role I've been in for a few years now. So yeah, it's been a journey, definitely.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's such a need for somebody though that can almost see the vision, or like kind of like what you're describing. You can see how all the pieces fit together, and
Yeah,
then I mean, that in itself is big. And then, there's others that can go make the vision happen, because now you've essentially given them the instructions to anything you've ever bought, right? You're the guy
yeah,
giving the instructions. Hopefully the good ones though, not the ones that you're
yeah.
like, what
Hopefully,
the heck is this picture? But I mean, that is crucial though, because I'm transitioning my mind, I think, the last few years to try to kind of view it more on a wavelength of where you're already at. Like, I don't know if I'll ever get down that true vision path, but I've noticed even some of my friends, even like playing a game or with them, they're like, oh, this and this. I'm like, how did you already, like, how are you
mm,
getting that, right? So for me, it's been a bit longer, and I think it's more of a trust thing too, to be like, well, security, databases, like, you start kind of throwing it out there and kind of putting it on a piece of paper or like a whiteboard, drawing it
yeah,
out. It's like, oh, that's how the vision can come together. So if I can get my mind to kind of do that up front, I'd be more successful. But it's I wouldn't say that I was naturally gifted in the way that as I clicked for you. Like, I'm a very good research individual. I can piece it together from research very easily, like rabbit hole down that path. But that is such a skill and such a mindset to have though. So transitioning right into talking about a little bit about your enterprise architecture, especially your current role. How would you say that a working enterprise architecture team has evolved your architecture governance and your frameworks?
yeah. I mean, I am fortunate to work with some really talented and great colleagues who know a lot more than I do in certain areas, and I find that's why it's a good team, because everyone brings something to the table. So it's very much a team. The main focus is really about, certainly in the business I am in at the moment, is to sort of establish and to engage and build a community of architects to help teams as we move things forward and evolve them. Governance is one of those things. It's really is important. It's not so you can't, and a lot of the big issues and risks, problems which happen are because of a lack of controls or lack of governance. Sometimes those can obviously be seen in advance, and sometimes it's retrospective. But I found certainly in architecture governance is all any kind of solution architecture as well. It's all about understanding what the risks are, finding understanding what the business sort of appetite for risk as well. So, for example, if I work for a large corporate established with a massive reputation, it's going to be a different risk appetite to a startup company who thinking, right, just want to get the money in, pay this few staff I've got to get forward. So it's a different kind of that. But there are some lines in the sand that you've got to, some markers you've got to outlay, and those often fall around when it could harm people, for example. One of the fundamental things in security is about making sure that people are protected, ultimately. I find that you can only do that if you work within a good team. You can't defend an organization. You'll have heroes, don't get me wrong, every organization has them, but ultimately, you need to have a good network. You need to know really have an idea of who's doing what, and who can I rely on when my expertise is not going to cover that particular area. I think it's quite important. A lot of people's impression of architecture governance is it's a bit ivory towerish, but there's some really well-established frameworks, things like TOGAF, things like FEA, Zeitman, these type of frameworks. And they've come about because of certain types of organizations which are developing. And interestingly, TOGAF 10 has taken a direction which is quite different to previous, where they're looking at more of a sort of, instead of more of a sort of kind of well-established kind of waterfall kind of development strategy, is much more orientated to a more rapidly changing development life cycle, which most businesses find themselves in these days. So what I've tried to do, certainly with my colleagues, is to have governance, but make it a bit more light touch and make it more enabling, and also self-serving as much as we can, and sort of help people understand that if I use something like decision records, for example, okay, it's just a bit of markdown, templated. But I'll tell you what, I can't remember decisions I made a week ago if I've not written them down. But if, and it's very easy when something goes wrong to say, oh, well, who built this? Who designed this? Who made this decision? And if you don't have that audit, that becomes a problem. And this is repeated over and over again throughout any kind of risk framework, is that you've got to have that good level of data, that good level of auditing, and a consistent process. The problem with architecture is most people who make architecture decisions are probably not solution architects. They're probably lead developers, engineering leads, who have people telling them, I want this to be done like this for tomorrow. This has got to be out. And they are making those decisions all the time. And if they're not recording them, it's really short-sighted to turn around and have a go at someone because they've made a mistake. And you've got to understand why they made a decision, what the drivers were, and what other options that they had at the time and what they recommended. So that's the kind of changing sort of architecture governance we're trying to do. I think things like principles are really important, but don't have too many of them. Make them relevant for your business. Think about where your business is going to be in a couple of years' time. Think about how your business operates. Who owns your business? Are you like a venture capital backed? Are you like a cooperative? Are you like a government agency? All these things factor into the type of governance that you would probably operate. Standards and blueprints are great, but they need to have playbooks. People need to have them and try them out. You can write things down, but if people aren't going to use them, then it's just not worth having them. So it's a challenge, and it's really interesting. And taking that from a solution level, where you're just thinking about a set of services or a particular specialism, for example, security, taking that to an enterprise is very much how does this work for the business? How do we move this business forward? And definitely quite interesting stuff.
Yeah, the playbook comment there, I take that as one of my takeaways from my time at Iris that has actually changed me for for the better, really, because the more that we think through things and then go back and refer to those those playbooks, right? Like, we learned this lesson, a lesson learned, adopt it, and now we got a smarter playbook for the next time and the next time. And that kind of goes into your organization and your documentation. That is key. I actually used that in a recent interview I did with a potential employer, is speaking through something like that. And I even thought to myself after because I'm a person that replays everything. Did you say everything right? Did you do everything
Yeah,
right? And I'm thinking through that, and I'm like, wow, I sound intelligent. Like I sound way better than when I entered into that. And I remember there was only one. I mean, by the time I had gotten to Iris and the playbook that we were using, on the IT side, there was a lot of good stuff already. And I remember the main thing I contributed from the outsider with fresh eyes looking at, which is always good, I think, too, is giving somebody who's never seen it just a fresh set of eyes was, this is all great, but where's the human pieces?
yeah,
And they were like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, we buy a company, we go through a merger and acquisition, right out of the gate, these people are already like, who are you?
yeah,
Do I
exactly.
still have a job? And like, just kind of going down that path. And they're like, oh yeah, I guess we didn't really think about it that way. And I'm like, that's fine. That was just, my perspective of looking at it from a, human connection piece is how do we plan for that? Because we got to get them rapidly on our side to begin to work to, start merging things or condensing teams environments or Slack to teams or whatever that might be. And then, we're asking people to do this almost day one. And it was like, well, okay. And that was what I contributed to that, because a lot of the other pieces were solid already, right? And then there's things that we learned along the way that we would update and put into those playbooks. But that's that's what I take away. So when you mentioned that, it's just like, yeah, that's super ingrained into my philosophy now. And starting one is different than coming into the middle of one. And I very much might be going down that venture of starting one and having a team, like you were just mentioning. I want a team of people who are smarter than me in different areas, because then we come together as one, and hopefully that playbook then becomes amazing and not just my gibberish that I put down at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. The other sort of aspect is around enabling decisions. A big part of architecture is understanding use case and understanding risk. And we do a lot of architecture reviews. And that's quite hard, for not trying to big myself up or anything, but essentially it's like I go into a set of services or a product and I have no idea how that product works. I then have to produce a load of recommended actions. I have to score it, that kind of thing, just to sort of try and give decision makers a sort of some recommendation. This is why I recommend you invest in, that kind of thing. And that can be quite a hard process. A bit like what you said about when companies are acquired. It's like, do we show all our skeletons in the cupboard? How do we want this product to move forward? And you have to not look at things just from a technical point of view, but look at it from a functional point of view, a cost point of view, the processes, the people involved. All of these things are quite important. And this all filters back into this kind of governance. It's about, looking after, thinking, because we've got to make decisions. We can't support software forever. We need to make as best we can informed decisions on stuff at a particular time. So governance it sounds, you'll say it to someone on the street, your governance saying, oh, that sounds like a policeman, the law coming down on you or whatever. But it shouldn't be like that. It's very much like, we need to work with you because things are changing. They change all the time. And we want to make sure that the information that we've got on a particular set of services product is the best we can.
Yeah, and I imagine like just like the feelings from some individuals who maybe worked on the project, right? And maybe we're recommending that their piece is, deprecated or we need to move away from it. And then you take that feeling away instead of going, okay, well, what I did worked for the time and it got us here. And like you said, technology always changes, things are constantly evolving. It takes a minute to get into that mindset to not have the attachment to some of these things
Mm.
too, to say, well, I did a great job for the period, because obviously we used it for however long we used it for, and now we're looking to go to the next wave, or I guess in like some of the things that you said, maybe we're recommending this project or this product is no longer something we want to sell. We need to move off from it. So now it's dead, right? Like we're end of
Right.
lifing it. It's whatever. I think that's a hard thing maybe for some people
Well,
to get behind. But as you learn and you hop around, right, like you're probably going to work on multiple things, and the things that you did at the time were the things that were needed. And I think that's just a mental shift. So
Yeah.
I imagine you got some backlash along the way with just
Uh,
recommending some of those
yeah,
things.
we just have to accept that, and
Yeah.
I think understand that ultimately it's not personal, but people do. People have pet projects. People have, particularly if it's something that they've built from scratch, and also if it's made a lot of money for a company, which then gets acquired by your business. You're dealing with that kind of thing, and and it does require a bit of diplomacy and just sort of trying to sort of rough around the edges, really, because ultimately it's about the future and about where you want to get to. And whilst obviously you can take a lot of lessons from the past, you can't stay in the past. You've got to move forward. It's really
Yeah,
important.
absolutely. So, transitioning a little bit into one of my favorite topics of the entire segment, because I am on the same wavelength. This is going to be really wordy because you've been really busy over the years. But let's talk a little bit about cloud security and just a wall of certifications. So, just some of my notes here is the Azure and AWS journey, Azure architect, DevOps engineer, data scientist, AI engineer, administrator, security, dynamics, power platform, AWS solutions architect, cloud practitioner, CCSP, GDRP, F&P, etc. That all gets us into why do you lean into certifications as a learning structure and maybe just not as like a vanity metric, or what are your takeaways? Why do you do it, and what motivates you to, in this case, actually finish them, right?
I do in this case. Yes. Well, first of all, I think people think I'm a bit mad because I do too many. Hopefully, um, last thing I'd ever would want to do is if people see me getting lots of certifications, it makes them feel, oh, I would definitely want it to be from a more encouragement point of view. If middle-aged person with middle intelligence can get all these certifications, I can as well. I spend chunks of my time, I'll be flat out and honest. People might go off, watch the football, and they might go, whatever they do in their spare time. I do a lot of reading, and I do use a lot of that time to prepare for IT certifications. It's I've found with learning, it's not just about my work. It's actually something I quite enjoy doing. Is about learning. Is again going back to my geeky, nerdy roots. It's like I actually like reading about stuff. I also think if you're an architect, I think you've got to take a bit of responsibility. You've got to say, hang on, if I'm giving advice and recommendations to people, I may not need to know the inside outs of a technology or service, but I need to know if it's, what things are probably going to work and what things are probably not going to work. Not really about giving options. It's about giving recommendations when you're an architect. I've found, I have been accused lots of times that I just like collecting badges. Well, maybe that goes back to the scout thing again. I have badges and I didn't get enough badges when I was a scout, and now I'm trying to collect them now, maybe. But people say, jokingly say to me, "Oh, you're just showing off," and it's not about that. It's honest. It's not about that. It is all about a process for me. My brain fires off at different tangents all the time. If I'm thinking, I could be reading my book and then I'm thinking about next Thursday's dinner or something like that. It just goes all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And again, go back, not a complete finisher. I struggle if I don't have a deadline, and I have to enforce a deadline. When I enforce a deadline, I think, right, then my sort of inner self says to me, right, if you want this, you really need to do the reading, and you need to stay on target. You need to focus in on what you need to learn. And whilst certifications are generally obviously going to be focused around particular topics which you're being examined for, I find that if you do quite a few of them, they overlap and they start to build out this sort of generalized kind of knowledge. And being a solution architect is all about kind of T-shaped kind of knowledge, in the sense that, although I'm still yet to find what I'm a specialist in, but I think having that general knowledge, I think, is really useful, and it might help you then make the connections when you're trying to solve difficult problems. Many people probably don't believe this, but I have skipped or failed just as many certification exams as I've passed. So it's not all about passing exams. I have, you can go and look at my certification record history on Pearson, and it's just like it's listed all over the place. So I find, it is a bit of a journey. Of course, when you pass the exam, you want to punch the air is a bit of a release. But the way I prepare for certifications, it's reading, but it's also doing, I might have I do have cloud subscriptions, which I test stuff out in, so it's a whole learning journey. I think actually sometimes I think if some of the online invigilators, because I do go to test centers occasionally, but most of the time they're online exams. I think if the feed hadn't cut out shortly, they would have a field day of me sort of like, almost it's like someone scoring a touchdown or scoring a goal, you know what I mean? It's just like that kind of celebration.
Oh, yes.
You feel that sense of achievement, and that in itself is quite addictive, I have to be honest. But taking aside, when that subsides, you do feel actually I've tested myself and it's independent. It's not just my word saying it. It's an independent body or a vendor who's saying that I've got the necessary skills on that one. That's great. Then it's all about weaving them back into your work. And that's the most important thing, because it's quite easy. And I've been guilty of this occasionally. You take certifications and then you don't use them. But then you've got to be fine with saying, right, okay, I'm just going to let that certification expire. It's only really relevant to keep those certifications valid if you need that in your day job, definitely. But it gives you that breadth. And I think, as I say, it's a journey. There is a certification communities out there. You get other people who are trying to go through the same kind of process. You can help each other. You can learn. I find that really positive.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think I noticed right off the get-go, because I turned myself into kind of a rare unicorn of like my first acknowledgement when people find out is like, yep, you can do it too, but I recommend don't be me. Because it's crazy at this point. But as somebody that was more into leadership, I kind of thought, well, I don't want to get further and further away from technology and then not be able to speak to, my SMEs or my engineers or whatever. And then I thought, well, if I dive into it and learn enough, we can have an intelligent conversation, and then I can go back and translate that to the business. And then 4 or 5 years later, I just haven't stopped, because some of the things that you pointed out is the battle of getting one of these, there's highs and lows. I call it the roller coaster. So you go up, you go down, and then you get that final like congrats, and then like all your endorphins release, and it's like you want to go celebrate, kind of thing. Like the battle's over, you won, and then you start another one. You go down the path. But the knowledge gained from it, I made a rule for myself, and that's kind of how I got on it, which was, if I'm going to learn something, then I might as well test for it. So that way, like to your point, have an independent body say I did it, and then it makes the conversation very different out of the gate to say, well, I know it because I did this. And then I can have a transition conversation where it's like, and here's where I've applied it, in a work context. So I think, yeah, you're right. Getting the knowledge is very helpful, and then being able to adapt and apply it, because now you have that knowledge, that makes the end-to-end portion of a certification journey just that much more valuable. And to find rare people like yourself, out there when I'm sitting around going like, nobody else is doing this, like, oh, okay. I'm just the weird person, like you're saying, just after another. I like punishment, I guess, but
yeah, yeah, definitely. I do. There are times where I think like, why am I doing another one? Why am I doing this? Like I said, I love reading. I could be going reading another book or something. Why am I spending hours doing this? But then I realize I do like the learning journey, and that's not for everybody, and that's fine. The other real sort of factor as well is I find that your learned experience is just going to be what your day-to-day experience is. If when you do certifications, you will learn about stuff which you wouldn't probably normally do in your current role, but you may end up doing in your next role or next project. And I think without being exposed to that kind of stuff, you'll probably excel at the stuff but you're not going to do that well. And I think the certifications give you that sort of breadth and depth, which will really help.
Yeah, a little bit of confidence going into it. Like you're right, maybe I didn't know it, but now I know enough to try, right? And then
Yeah.
you kind of figure that out from there. That's that's entirely what I try to do is just try to keep learning, like you said. Technology changes all the time, or even if it's the methodology, certification, just knowing all the different possibilities, or going, hey, maybe for this organization or for this problem, the right thing to do is to take a little bit from each of them and craft something that fits here. Just
Mm.
having that knowledge, it's one of my favorite questions when I get asked, "What's your favorite methodology?" And it's the one I always say, it's the one that works, the one that is
Yeah.
going to get the job done is the one that I like the best. I know a bunch of them, but let's make something that fits here. And it always makes people kind of stop and yeah, don't try to force, a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
Let's pick something that works for this and where we want to go and how we want to, work in that environment. But in transitioning from the fun and the highlights, let's go into like how we would actually say no to a lot of different things, or how to stop different tracks, right? So like when you're talking about maybe protecting like some of your deeper working time for yourself or for the other engineers you might be watching, what kind of maybe acknowledgement or advice you would give to them to say, hey, it's okay to say no to something, or stop. What kind of advice would you give somebody in that kind of protected environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things I would say. So definitely, if you're going to say no to someone, have a reason why you're saying no. Is rule number one. Because if you just say no and then you've got a half-hearted kind of response after that, then people are going to question your judgment, and they're also going to sort of say, well, look, how can I trust that no was the right answer in this particular case? How can I trust when you're so really enthusiastic and say yes and all the rest of it? So I think it's about being consistent on that kind of front. I think in terms of sort of protecting your own time, you can give your best when you protect your own time. Simple things, turn off notifications when you want to think, but periods of time where you want to learn, that works differently for different people. Some people work best in the morning, talk to your line manager, just sort of say, look, I want to learn about this new, as part of my continued development. I want to learn about this new particular service. I take things in better in the morning. So I'm going to block this time out. Block your diary out, control your diary, get that understanding. I always think respect other people's do not disturb and focus time, because then they'll start to respect yours as well. So I think, particularly from my point of view, I'm an individual which sends out because I run certain programs at my company, I send out a lot of notifications, a lot of updates. And I think you have to understand with other people that there's only so much bandwidth you can. So if you give people that time, then they will give you that time definitely back. I find it really hard is not to reply immediately to requests. And it's taken a lot of time, and I'm still working on this, to sort of try and think, right, yes, I know that's just come up. Yes, I know that's important, but no, actually, I'm doing this task. I'm halfway through this task, and I really just want to get this one done. And it's a bit of discipline, self-discipline, to just try. I find that hard because, like I said earlier, my mind, as soon as there's an update thing, something going on, oh, I wonder what that's about, you lose that sort of flow. And I think it's important to help protect that. So, turning off those notifications, I think one good feature about Teams is if you send enough messages out, get enough messages back, it only goes up to like 9 or 10 on the screen. Then after that, it stays the same. So therefore, then you don't have the urge. Whereas if it's less than 9, you see the numbers coming in. So I think, controlling the hose pipe of notifications is definitely a good way to protect your time. Yeah, I think in this day and age, using AI agents to automate, tasks, whether it's filtering inboxes, whether it's doing the one report you've got to do for your line manager every Tuesday, you shouldn't really be doing that manual tasks. Yes, you could delegate it to your team member, but it'd be better if you delegate that to an AI agent if it can deal with it. automation really is what will free your time. That's what always has freed people of time. And then it gives you that time to think about, other pressing problems and other things that you want to do. The other thing I try and do is try and encourage others to do research first. So I get this a bit, and again, I don't want to sound a bit big-headed, but it is about people think I know stuff or I know who to contact. So they'll immediately contact me because they think, right, if I contact Adam, he will just tell me the answer. And you think, right, that's shortcutting. And it's a bit like if you use an LLM, you can get an answer from an LLM. You could paste that answer back, but you haven't invested that time. You haven't invested the research, you haven't invested sort of that learning aspect. And I think in this day and age, it's about prioritizing when you need to do that learning and when you don't need to do that learning. But I do find it, it is frustrating when you have to say something, look, and you scroll up in the Teams chat and you've told the same thing to the same person, 2 weeks previous. And you're thinking like, you just need to do some self-discovery, some research. And then you think, right, well, how can I help them with that? And you think, right, that's the key, is the enabling. It's saying, right, okay, make it easy for other people to discover stuff. And that will certainly help protect your team working.
Yeah, there's so many things there, like the back and forth, right? You want to be helpful, but then maybe sometimes being helpful is teaching the lesson of I was, like you said, I was helpful for you 2 weeks ago, and here we are. So you didn't actually learn, and the best thing for you is to learn. It's
And I,
when you mentioned like the messages coming in, it drives at me, like me mentally. I'm like, I want to respond to this, and if I don't respond to this, will I forget to respond to this? So that's when I've had to go into like some kind of task manager or some sort and just throw it over in there, so I know to try to come back to it and like do it. But to your point, like I'm doing something right now that I've figured out is prioritized, right? I need to do that. And this isn't, back to that. It's not nobody's gonna die. We're not in a crisis. Like, obviously kind of measure the risk of what's coming into you, right? Read it enough and then go, okay, shelve. But I know exactly what you're talking about. It pulls at me whenever I see it. I'm like, well, I can just respond to it right now. And if I get 10 of those, then what happened to my task? Like,
definitely, yeah. And you mentioned task managers. It doesn't need to be a great, full-fledged task planner. It could just be a really simple Kanban board, where you're just moving things across. Because there's only so many things, certainly for me, there's only a certain number of things I can keep in my head at any point in time. And I find that quite helpful. I think one habit I have is opening up Notepad and dumping stuff in Notepad. That's old school, right? The problem with doing that is you lose the context of that really, really quickly. So it's just, if you can contextualize your save for later tasks, even with a couple of lines, it saves you a lot of time where you have to sort of come back to it later on and sort of go through it again. But yeah, it's, and I think it's just important to understand that, it's okay to forget stuff, and it's okay to sort of not be able to remember everything, and people are forgiving, you just have to sort of use some of the tools that you've got. Some of the agentic AI tooling will help you greatly with this kind of stuff. That's summarizing all of that kind of stuff. It's great for that. Use it. If you don't use it, everyone else is using it, so you need to use them as well. So I think using that, you can then, like I said, prioritize your time the way that you want to use it and how you will give most value to yourself and to others.
yeah, for like meeting notes, for example, like that has been so helpful for me to be like, as somebody who, the way that my brain works and whatnot is if I'm just absorbing, and I want to say something, then like I have conflicts. But if I can go back and read like a summary, it's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And it has helped tremendously. So yes, and the notepad thing, on top of that, like just continuing to add to it and going, now it's just one big run on of what is this? I'm guilty of that as well. I totally understand.
But old habit of mine, I need to just try. I am getting better, but old habits are hard to kick, and but that's one you should definitely kick if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I'm heavy into to AI, and it kind of jumping to the next segment of just again summarizing just the learning, the data science, and the AI ethics portions of that. And you yourself have had numerous engineering talk programs. One of my notes is over 100 plus sessions a year, or the recent year. That's crazy. That's incredible. It's a crazy good thing, but I've got to imagine that you're using all kinds of different, helpful agents while you're doing that kind of thing. So, also being a learning champion at Iris yourself, being in multiple programs that they put on, and encouraging, some of the certification talks that we've had and experimentation and just the knowledge sharing. With all of that kind of conversations and whatnot going on, organization and knowing how to not do notepad things and using some AI, how would you give maybe some advice on how to keep things straight there?
Yeah, I think it's going back to protecting your time again, in the sense that, right, if I'm spending my time, a day a week doing admin stuff, if I'm an administrator, then fine. That's kind of what you've been paid for, and obviously there's ways you can improve that. But I found at the start when I was doing the engineering talks program at the start, I was spending a lot of time sending out invites, chasing people, all of that kind of stuff. And I was thinking like, or if it's one of our online video learning platforms, for example, it's like chasing people for use. Come on, use this service because other people can use it if you're not using it. But people not responding and it takes a load of time. And without having any kind of data analysis tools or any kind of automation, that becomes, it'll just take over your entire time and your entire job. And I'm pretty sure my company are not paying me to do that. So I had to find ways to deal with that and a variety of tools, and it's good because I like coding. So I found there's ways I can do this. More recently, in the last year or so, I can get better with my prompting. I can obviously get an agent to start doing some of that stuff for me, which is great. And once you've got that working and established, fab, saves you a bit of time, move on to the next thing. I think in terms of, so then the main focus of the learning side of things is, right, okay, what's the content? What do we want to talk about? And those are the more important things than really sort of just the organization of it. But yeah, I think sort of talking about learning, and often I find, particularly when I'm reviewing solution designs of what people are trying to change their software, I think, oh my goodness, this is like the 10th time I've seen this. You know what I mean? Have you not talked to such and such? They literally implemented this like last year. You know what I mean? That's why I think learning communities, having someone championing just, even if your your immediate response is, oh, is Adam banging on again about certifications or banging on? It actually says, well, no, actually, hang on. There's something in there in the sense that if I actually learn a bit more, if I find out what other teams are doing, if I get involved in a community of practice, or if I even present on the topic, or teach someone even better, then you'll learn more. You'll learn even more that way. That's it's a feedback mechanism. You will, I think that's how I've sort of tried to use all the learning side. If I champion it, people come to me with things I had no idea about, and they'll say, "Oh, have you found out? Do you know about this?" I go, "No, I had no idea about this, but now you've told me, I'm going to go have a look at it." I don't think people would come to me if I didn't champion sort of, certain ideas. They wouldn't come to me because they'd probably think, "Oh, he's probably not interested," or "I'm not going to." Or I don't know him. I mean, probably with large companies, you don't know. You have to build that network. I think in terms of, I mean, I've just finished an apprenticeship. I've gone back to university like yourself, and and that itself was an experience which I didn't expect I was going to do that. Certainly not at my age, but I found it really rewarding. I think data science is something which I've kind of always done in one form or another. Back in the 90s, it was called statistical modeling and statistical analysis. Whereas, now it's so important. It's got the word science at the end of it. it's kind of something I've always been doing. It's something I'm always digging into the data. I'm really interested about what's the lineage of that data, what's the bias, what's gone into that data, where's that data come from, who's getting the benefit out of that data, what message is that trying to say, what message is someone trying to use its data to justify, that kind of thing. I find all of that stuff fascinating, and that's why I went back into it. But obviously there's lots of ethical concerns with data, and particularly with AI, how that impacts people. And it's really important, I think, it's more of a life skill. Certainly, I would say people need to be talking about this a lot more in schools, and I'm sure they are to a degree, but really sort of emphasizing the fact that whilst this technology is fantastic, there are serious concerns and risks which are not necessarily being addressed at the moment, which is worrying. So yeah, I think a bit, I think that might go back to reading. I'm really interested in things like platform capitalism, impact of big tech, understanding sort of like the impact of data. Once you've got what is enough information, what is reliable information, seeing stuff being misused, misrepresented, even sometimes with good intent, not necessarily always with bad intent. And it's just that whole area I find is fascinating. And I was thinking, there's something I could study, something I could go back into, and it sort of fit in nicely into my learning objectives, which is great. Yeah.
And it all kinds of comes back to how it all fits together, right? Just like the
Yeah.
puzzle. So it,
Yeah.
it totally makes sense. And, a data scientist having that kind of enterprise mindset, architectural mindset, I got to imagine will just reap all kinds of benefits, long term and whatnot, especially, as you're mentioning, with the AI world, which we'll get to after our break here. So I think it's a great time to go ahead and take that sponsorship break.
Technology should drive progress, not complexity. At Tricentra, we align IT strategy with your business goals, helping you transform with purpose. From modernization and automation to AI-driven insights, our team delivers solutions that accelerate growth and efficiency. And for international organizations looking for a trusted U.S. partner, Tricentra is here to make your transformation seamless. Visit tricentra.com and book your consultation today.
Now that we've seen how Adam blends cloud architecture and learning, let's look ahead where all of that is going and what the future architect might look like. So, with the future of architecture, AI, and engineering, how is the role of like an enterprise architect changing in an AI driven world?
Well, I'm slightly biased, but I think enterprise architecture is actually becoming more increasingly more important as a sort of strategic kind of voice in the room, certainly when you're making wider decisions across a business. I think whilst LLM tooling, those our sort of first wave of AI, because we will have lots of waves of variety of different AI-enabled technologies. Gen AI itself, I think, is a great specific specialized tool, specialized scenarios. I think there's plenty of examples where it's not been that good at, and also has had some, questionable aspects. So, and can confuse people. So, and I think in terms of enterprise architecture, it's all about sort of being a risk leader. It's all about sort of like understanding the use case. AI is a tool. Ultimately, we are not at a point of, as far as I'm aware, we're not at a point where we have generalized artificial intelligence. All AI tooling at the moment would be used in that kind of manner. But I think in terms of enterprise architect, they need to understand how this is impacting businesses. Whereas 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you're thinking about how do I protect the network? Let's say from a security perspective, how do I protect the network? So sort of 10 years ago, where it's much more focused on the identity. Now you're thinking, I've now got a constantly evolving sort of threat actors, in terms of AI. How am I going to deal with that? How am I going to build these architectures to deal with that? Is it possible? Do we even have enough time to do that? So I think certainly I think a big area is thinking about, the services that I'm using are not actually built by humans. They're built by AI agents, which are evolving and adapting. And it's understanding sort of okay, right? So it's a bit of a black box. I don't really understand what's going on inside. Where are the guardrails? How's ethics been baked in here? All these things, I think, become more and more important when you're the sort of big picture person, where you're sort of like saying, this is the strategy we're using. You're thinking like, well, hang on a second, I'm taking responsibility away from another human who might be building that technology to an agent who, maybe started off in the right direction, but who knows where it's going. So I think that's a key sort of growth area to really think about how that impacts the large organizations. I think certainly more of my role is about identifying end-to-end automation, is to understand how, whilst I think lots of people have been employing automation in lots of different areas of the business, it's how do you connect that up? How do you connect those capabilities up across that whole organization as a entity moving forward, as opposed to we just look after security here, or we're just doing professional services. So yeah, definitely going to be involved in that, and sort of redefining how the operating model of the business works. I think certainly as companies get to a certain size, I think it's really important to have those kind of individuals in those kind of roles in the business who may not necessarily be like a business owner or an executive, having those sort of servant leadership based roles to sort of help set strategy.
100%. So when we're talking about like ethics and sustainability and data stewardship, how do you feel that belongs in an architectural conversation?
I think they're important. I think we're very much at the really early stage in terms of how AI-enabled technology is going to impact society. I like the word humongous, but there's a huge amount of hype and opinion out there, and we're still very early days, I think. If you look at, say, something like the Gartner hype cycle, even for Gen AI, which again is part of AI, it's not whole of AI, is rapidly descending into the trough of despair. I think people are starting, we may well be on an economic shock where people realize that the investment that they're putting in to companies may not necessarily give the same kind of return as they expected, or a different return. So, and how you adjust to that. So I think from an enterprise architect point of view, it's understanding, if you're giving advice, recommendations on where certain AI enabled technologies are taking you, you have to bear that in mind. And I think in terms of AI-enabled services, it all comes ultimately back down to the data that these services are running on, what models they've been trained on. So then you're thinking about the bias, which is in all data sets. Have you got the necessary guardrails to protect against that? Do you understand that any implications of decisions which have been made in that training that impact the services? How do you reflect that up into more business oriented speak? No executive, unless they're a data specialist, are going to care. If the model predicts this service and makes a mistake and costs the company a lot of money, how do we deal with that? How do we protect against that? All of that kind of stuff. So here again, I think this is where enterprise architects can provide value. They can provide awareness. They can help different groups understand. Whilst in the last 5-10 years, we might have had a lot of, say, push on security awareness because of hybrid wars and the threat vectors from there. I think people need to also be aware of data, and not just in your work life, but in your own life, understanding, able to develop your own critical thinking, not being too reliant on LLM tools just telling you the answer. I think I mentioned this earlier, so going back to that, is that if you don't do the learning journey, or a necessary part of the learning journey, the information is transient, it will just disappear immediately. So again, I think enterprise architects are definitely taking that kind of role of sort of being like a strategic in terms of AI.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, one of the best things that the AI companies have done is made it so accessible, right? So it's good in some ways, but very dangerous in other ways, that you're just taking whatever it's giving you and applying it. And is like to your point, do you have the background to or the knowledge to go, that doesn't sound right. And then you've made a, possibly catastrophic move or a big financial impact because you just took it at its word. Whereas it 100% is a tool that can enhance the abilities of knowing what you're asking, where you're going, and going, okay, this is what I'm asking you to know. You're hallucinating. Let's get.
So from the ethics and fairness point of view, you've got things like, ethical guardrails, regulatory fines, brand damage, user trust. All of those things are really important. That's how you might explain them to the executive, in the sense that, if it's going to affect our customer loyalty, that hits home. Whereas if you start talking about bias and lineage, they're probably not going to know what that means. I think, people, it's certainly from an ethics point of view, it's got to be baked in. It can't just be bolted on. It can't just sort of say, oh, okay, well, we'll wait to the first disaster we have, and then we'll change. This sort of kind of idea is sort of understanding what the threat is. If you have that mentality, then it's a matter of time, as opposed to if it's going to happen or not. I think another thing as well around the cost efficiency is just understanding that there is a cost to AI. I like the example that, the amount of energy it requires Gen AI to do some tasks and a human to do so, and a human uses like 10 or 15 watts or something like that. And the amount of power which these data centers are using to do the same kind of thing. I think people need to put stuff into a bit more perspective. And I think having that kind of attitude certainly helps.
Yeah, and going on the governance topic is one of the things. If I've dove deep into some of these interview cycles with some of these companies, and them asking, candidates or asking me in this context, and I'm like, so you don't have anything set up for AI currently? Like, that's a holistic risk in itself already, because your employees are already throwing your company data out there. Things you're not controlling. You don't have any of the secure guardrails set up. Like, that stuff, you already have exposed your risk. Like, understand where you're at this point then, because you need to start reeling it back in. And some companies don't understand that, or aren't super liking maybe the attitude towards that. But that's what's happening. You can't click a button and just set up Copilot and like, oh cool, we have AI, we're good to go. It's
It doesn't work
how it
that
happens.
way. I think the thing about data as well is that even if you've got the guardrails, and even if you've got the perceived threat paths nailed today, tomorrow is a different picture. And, and it's hard. But you do need people who can make those kind of sort of bigger picture decisions. I think this is what's going to happen. As an architect, you've got to accept that, get things. As an architect, you're going to get things which are sort of like, you're going to get things wrong. But you have that recommendation. And I think, that's why people come to you and ask you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing is we get things wrong, but we learn from those things and we get better. And being in this day and age of AI and it rapidly changing, being a cybersecurity person, talk about terrifying, right? Like,
Yeah.
trying to keep ahead of that right now. But you have to try, at the end of the day, and trying as an architect is the same way, right? Like, hey, it might have been a great thought at the time, and it might have rapidly changed, and that's just where we're living right now. So transitioning into a fun segment, I'm curious to some of these answers, because I see some of the questions and I'm like, oh, I'm real curious where you're going to head. So first rapid fire question, Azure or AWS?
Can I say both or neither? Or do I have to pick one?
Well, I'm sure you're going to tell me about the pros and cons, because that's how I would take the question, because they're great for both.
It does depend. Probably marginally Azure, because of my background, in the sense that what I'm used to. But I found some of the AWS services really great and really useful and really easy to use. So the answer to that is typical architect. It should be depends. But I think both vendors have offer a lot of services which are equivalent, and they definitely offer services which are great at certain use cases. And I think the role of the architect there is really to understand what those differences are and make sure that you apply them effectively to the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, is being aware of who does what and how, what potentially works better, across the board. Teams is a great example of that. There's already a Slack competitor out there. I typically see like a G Suite, or I guess now it's Google whatever, but Google/Slack is the environment, or you see the Microsoft Teams endeavor, and even AWS throwing up the why bother? Like there's places that are doing it better than us, but we do so many other things great. You can get the best of both worlds across all of them. So yeah, I would have answered it similarly. Architects diagramming. So whiteboard, mural, or notepad?
Well, I think some people might not think this, but for me, it's definitely whiteboard, because of there's a bit of I have a whiteboard here, right here. I like to see stuff where I can rub things out and tick stuff up. Mural is great. Other online collaborative spaces are fantastic. They work great, but from my own personal point of view, I would love a massive big board which I could scribble on all day. I can be more definite on that one.
I upgraded my cameras this year because behind me right now is just a big banner on a big whiteboard. And I've already had a couple sessions here behind me. Like on the flip side of this, you'd see a bunch of diagramming of like building an application is essentially what we were doing, and talking through it and then actually drawing it out and then seeing like it kind of come to life is like the two sides of my brain being happy about understanding and absorbing it. So I'm with you if I can do that, but I upgraded my webcam so that it has like a whiteboard mode where it like focuses on it kind of like a mural style. It's just not interactive in the sense that somebody else can draw on it, but I found that super useful, especially if I'm trying to like teach somebody or describe how to connect the dots. So with you there.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's see. Deep dive blog post or a lightning talk?
For me, probably lightning talk. It would have to be really interactive. I think if I wrote a deep dive blog post, I danger into waffling very quickly. I'd lose focus. Whereas I think if it's a lightning talk, I'm hoping there's an audience. I mean, you do have an audience for a blog post, hopefully, as well. But with a lightning talk, there's somebody you're talking to and they can interrupt you. That's why I often sort of say in engineering talks, please, someone interrupt me. You probably know more about stuff than I do, and you can correct me when I'm going wrong.
Yeah, the rabbit hole syndrome. Yeah, the first paragraph might be great, and then paragraph 2, it's a little less great, and then by paragraph 4 or 5, what was I writing about? So evenings. Are you doing a coding experiment, a data science course, or a sci-fi show?
Well, I think until recently it was data science, because obviously I was doing a degree, and there'll be a bit more of that after Christmas, no doubt. But I want to say sci-fi show. It's probably more book. I mean, I tend to read a lot of sci-fi books, so I'm trying to get through. I read a lot of science books as well as science fiction books, so I'm trying to mix it up a little bit. But yeah, I think I find if staring at a computer all day, and I just think in the evening I just need to look at something else, not a screen. So I'm trying to sort of move into that kind of direction.
Oh, no, that makes sense. Yeah, too much screen time I mean, especially if you're studying, it becomes hard because then it's really easy for me to get a virtual book and have it with me everywhere. So I'm still staring at a screen versus a book. But I mean, I get that. I'm trying to like frame my next year of like, there are certs that I absolutely want to get. There's a couple vouchers that are, getting close to expiring that I'm trying to get off my radar, and then trying to figure out how do I balance it to get what I want to get, but then also transition into other things that need time, right? You're mentioning reading and different topics in different ways that aren't anything to do with certifications and whatnot. And that's what I've noticed too, is balancing your life and your mental health is like, okay, well, you've talked about maybe swinging that club a little bit better. You should probably actually try to swing. You got to force yourself. So your favorite kind of side project? tooling, data experiment, AI demo, etc.
I would say now it's probably just hacking at data. I mean, I got, for my birthday this year, I got a weather station. So I'm just hacking the data from that, which doesn't sound that exciting to people I know. But to me, sort of seeing trends and seeing just, what's going on with that? Is the device broken? You know, that kind of thing. It's just sort of quite good for. I think if you have a side hustle, side project, just have something where it can better something going on in your life. If it's like just learning about something new, or if it's, you know, you want to eat healthier, or you want to do some exercise, that kind of thing, find something. You know, I've heard one of my friends said to me, you know, just turn things into a science. When you turn them into a science, you look at the data, you will then sort of try and, you know, beat yourself, the data kind of thing. So it's those kind of side projects I quite like. Definitely.
It's kind of funny that you mention like the weather project. I had a buddy earlier this year. I forget what we were doing, but he threw on a Twitch stream of something he says he watches in bed, and it was just essentially a weather person tracking, you know, storms all over the place. And I mean, I found it fascinating of like how they were figuring all of this stuff out and being able to track it and, you know, warn people and just like you said, the data portion of it. Now I haven't like dug deep into the side that you're looking at, but ironically, I'm like, oh, I watched something all night once of a topic that I probably wouldn't have thrown on. I didn't know anything about it, and then I started asking questions, and then there we are. So this or that, hands-on coding versus strategy decks.
I think this is an easier one. I would say hands-on coding. Not that I don't have to do the latter, but I think if you can show someone, if you LML assisted or your own code, hit run, and it exhibits that new feature, and then you make a change, show that change, pray to the demo gremlins to not strike you down, and it all works. That definitely beats me. That's definitely a win for me, as opposed to trying to get through a strategy deck. I think when it's sort of like show something, get the immediate response, and then go through that kind of small iterative kind of process again. I think that can build sort of like you get that sort of a quick cycle of feedback, whereas strategy deck, you're not quite sure. You're kind of selling an idea. You don't really know how well people have bought into that idea. It takes a bit longer. So yeah, definitely hands-on coding. Definitely, win that one.
So this one here, refactoring, legacy or vintage, as I've learned, versus greenfield design.
I think I'll probably go for refactoring here, because I think it's really quite rare that I would ever start, unless it's a side project that I'm doing. Very rare you're going to come across a greenfield project these days. There's always something there which, we're building something new, but actually all of this stuff over here needs to integrate with it. So you've always got something going on like that. So I think, like I say, I love hacking old code, and it drives me to despair sometimes, but when it works, it's great. And I don't know, there's something about, a friend of mine said, you know, we have this argument about architecture or gardening, and he's a developer. He's definitely a developer, and he always says gardening is better than architecture because you're sort of keeping things tidy, but you know, things change, you don't have to worry about it. So I think, architecture, yeah, but if you clear out the stuff, you see the beautiful sort of like, you know, beautiful building or whatever. So, you know, I think with the refactoring, you get to see that picture and you get the delight of gardening as well. So that's my argument.
That is a fun conversation. I wouldn't have been envisioning gardening being part of it, but it makes so much sense. Solo deep work versus a collaborative design session.
Yeah, I would go collaboration, because most of my work is about solving big picture ideas, and you can only do that when you're in a collaborative session with someone. So don't get me wrong, solo deep work is great. If you know, you've got the context, you know, you've got a defined problem, you know what you need to get done, great, yeah. But I think most of the work is all about people. It's all about building relationships with people. You can't do that on your own. You've got to collaborate.
And then in the case of that, then this one might be an interesting one. So teaching others versus learning something entirely new.
I'd probably go back to what I said, teaching others, I think is, I think that's the way, that's when you start to learn something properly, is when you're in a position to teach someone else to do that. And when I've talked to lecturers and teachers about, I mean, I come from a family, and my parents were both teachers, and my grandfather. I think you get to a certain use of the material, but you learn the material to that next level. When it's yourself learning something new, whilst that could be good fun, you're only going to expand your knowledge by sharing that with other people. The best way of sharing that is to be able to teach someone, and then you can draw. Someone will ask you a question. There's never a dumb question. You know, there's lots of dumb answers, but there's never a dumb question. And you know, you suddenly think, you know, that isn't what I thought it was, and then it deepens your learning further. So yeah, definitely teaching others, I think.
One of my favorite talking points around that topic is, and I would probably choose the same, is I had a very green entry level girl that we hired to one of our teams. And she was afraid to talk into, like, you know, we'd have a team conversation around something, and she was afraid to speak because she knew that she didn't know a lot, but she was new to the team. And same thing, right? And encourage everybody, like, hey, put your hand up, whatever it is. And she asked something that wasn't exactly what the topic was, but it led us to thinking about that, and then led us down to a path where we were then solutioning what the actual situation. And I was, you know, went back to her, and I'm like, and that's exactly why, regardless of what your title is or how far you are in your career or whatever, we're smarter and better together by, you know, using each other's brains and thinking differently. And maybe you didn't solve it, but you said something that triggered it to then get us to solve it. And you did contribute, right? So, you know, to this day, you know, still makes her feel great.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the sort of experience of some of our small vintage people, is to give people the space to do that, you know, and just to say, look, hang on, you know, ask your question. You know, you don't want to come out of that think, oh, I wish I just asked that. And you just, I often, you know, certainly in my early career, you know, I often thought, well, maybe I shouldn't ask that. Maybe I should just, and you know, you just have to get comfortable with just sort of, you know, and most good sort of facilitators of like a seminar or academic, they will, even if even at the worst case, they think it's a dumb question, they will still respond to you and say, sort of like, you know, well, that's an interesting angle. Have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? Even if the person's getting the wrong answer, they will direct you. And I think that's the important thing as sort of technical enablers to do, is that even if you think that what they're doing is completely wrong, if you shout them down and sort of say, oh, that's absolute nonsense, you know, you ain't going to get a positive response. You know, you got to come back with a reason. You've got to explain why. It's important.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, like, whenever I'm in a leadership role, I try to establish right out of the gate is all we have is one another. We're going to trust one another. We're going to encourage one another, you know, have that kind of, you know, conversation back and forth, or teaching session, right? Like, we're only as smart as we know at that given time. So the more that we learn, the better we are. And maybe it triggers a real passion, and that person goes and deep dives into it. And now look at everything we got from asking a question, right? So, and that takes me to one of my favorite questions that I ask every time. So if enterprise architecture had a soundtrack, what sound or genre would it be?
Well, I like music. I love music. And I knew you were going to ask me this question. So I had a little time to think about it, but most of my music choices are probably alternative indie rock, sort of electronic music. The first one I would put on the list would be Where Is My Mind by the Pixies. So I think there's a song that captures confusion when architects are trying to make sense of complex, undocumented, vintage software, and then trying to desperately seek that clarity through the chaos, and try and explain that to other people. So that was my first one. And then my second one was A Forest by The Cure. I think, again, similar kind of sentiment. An architect sort of navigating through a vast, complex and poorly mapped enterprise environment, a bit like a forest, trying to find that clearing or clear path through to sort of try and get that right idea, the right strategy to help you through that. And then my last, so I'll give him 3 here. You only asked for 1. I'm giving far too much. The last one I would say is Selected Ambient Works by Aphex Twin, because it represents quite calm music generally, but occasionally goes a bit mad and a bit left field. But there's underlying tones which repeat. So like your blueprints, your kind of playbooks, and going back to that calmness can help you sort of make the best kind of decisions moving forward. So there you go. There's my 3 suggestions.
Yeah, I think anybody that listens to this next part of it is like, start here, here's your actual soundtrack, and then here's the advice piece. So one piece of advice that you would give to a developer who wants to move into architecture.
Yeah. So this is something I'm dealing with right now, because I would do a solution architect curriculum at work at the moment. I would ask your team leads why. Get involved in those conversations in your, not necessarily in your stand-up, because that should be short, nice and sweet kind of stand-ups. But when you're starting to sort of think about your software, making changes to software, ask the questions why. Try to understand some of the underlying technologies in greater depth. Try and read around. Do a lot of side hustles because, like I said earlier, most of the time you won't be writing code in necessarily the technology that you want to learn. So you got to find other avenues to do that. But I think understanding why, always coming up with options, but always having a recommendation. So you're going to your lead saying, I recommend we do this, not how do we do it, or here are my options, what do you think is best? It's having that recommendation, I think, is really important.
Oh, very good advice. One principle that you wish every executive understood about software and cloud.
Well, there's a couple of things. I think I'll take an AI one first. So AI, as in Gen AI, does not mean you don't need engineers. Okay. Let's be honest, understanding the vast AI generated swamp of code is going to require either general AI or people to unpick. So that's the 2020s version of technical debt, I'm afraid, which is being built right now. And it's what's going to be, we will need people to unpick that, I'm afraid. So that's one bit of advice. I think, don't drink the Gen A Kool-Aid. Understand what it really means. I think in terms of more on the sort of software and cloud side, on the cloud side, understand how your vendor's making money out of you. Ultimately, are you just trying to fit their use case, or are you actually getting benefit from them? Are they reducing your own costs and so forth? So I would definitely, it's too easy to insert in those kind of literature, in the Harvard Business Review, all those kind of where people will have 5 minutes or they're having something summarizing it for them. It's very easy to miss the detail. And I think sometimes, particularly if that's your area of responsibility, you do need to delve into the detail to get more insight.
No, very, very good. I mean, that's the flip side to AI is no conversation around the governance and how to set up or protect it. But then we can maybe save some money,
Well, it's
essentially.
the same as security. The same idea is the sense that why have we been breached? And I said, well, you only paid for this amount of cover. You only covered like 10% of your architecture. The threat out there is not going to give two hoots about which part of your system is or what strategically potentially is important. They're going to think about, can I make money out of this, and how quickly can I, is this low hanging fruit which I can breach easily? So I think it's just sometimes having the mindset of, yes, sometimes things cost. You can't just strip everything down to minimal cost. You do have to have a level of expenditure to be safe, I think, in this industry.
Yeah, I mean, now we're talking risk profile and how many places even understand what that means.
Yeah,
but it's also a needed thing that we could have a whole security-led conversation around. So last question, an invite that you would always accept.
Definitely, I would always accept any junior or senior engineer who just wants to learn a new topic. And if I can help them, I will try. And, I think those kind of invites I like. If they come to me and say, I want to learn this, and this is why I want to learn this, perfect. And if I can help, I will always try and make the time to help them.
I 100% agree with that. It's the same mentality I try to do. I always think back of being in the other person's shoes, or, treat humans like humans. And what was it like for me, going up and leaving things in a better place, right? If I can help somebody, they possibly could surpass where I'm at, today when they get there. All of those things, like, I wish that I would have done a lot of those things. So I try to do the same mentality. And with that, we're just going to talk a little bit about where listeners can find Adam. They can find him on LinkedIn, obviously. Are there other sites or places where any of your conversations or posts or blogs or any kind of...
No, that's probably the best place to find me at the moment. But yeah, feel free to reach out if you want to talk tech. And I have opinions and recommendations, so please do reach out. I'm more than happy to.
And we'll include Adam's link in the description of the episode. And if anybody finds our conversations, especially all of the very smart things that Adam talked about during the context of this, feel free to like, subscribe, or share. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. So I will see you at the next meeting. And I appreciate you, Adam, taking the time to walk through with me with this. It was a major pleasure to see you again, speak with you. It had been far too long. I can't believe it was February when I seen you. It seems like 3 years ago at this point, but it is a pleasure.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and all the best.
Wonderful. All right. Take care, everyone.